Welcome back to the virtual Lubar Center, where we are joined by Professor Charles Franklin, the director of the Marquette Law School Poll. I'm Alan Borsuk. I'm a senior fellow around here, but I'm not the one you want to hear from. We want to hear from Charles, and we will continue a look that we began in our first session at the results of a new national survey by the Marquette Law School Poll. Tell us about the details.
So this is our national polling that we do every other month. It's conducted based on a national sample of postal addresses. Respondents are recruited for the survey through that national probability survey and then interviewed online for this particular survey. We were in the field September 7th through the 14th. With interviews of 1,448 adults with a margin of error of plus or minus 3.4 percentage points.
Let's begin with what I would consider the most eye-catching result we got. Frankly, I wasn't expecting it to be, but I think it was, which related to the FBI search of former President Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort. What do we find?
Yeah, I was looking for a question here that could be as factual as possible. And so the question I asked was, do you believe that top secret and other classified documents were in Mar-a-Lago this summer, found in Mar-a-Lago this summer? And so it's just a yes, I believe there were classified documents there. No, I do not believe there were classified documents there this summer. And in this survey, 33% say they do not believe there were top secret documents there. 67% that say there were such documents. So this is, I think, interesting. You know, there are certainly arguments that President Trump and his attorneys have raised about the nature of those documents, but it's just a straightforward question, were there such documents or not? We saw photographs, we've seen news reports, but a third of the public say they're not. Now, it's hardly a surprise that party might play a role in that. 61% of Republicans say they do not believe there were secret documents at Mar-a-Lago. 39% of Republicans believe there were. With independents, two-thirds, 65%, say there were secret documents, 34% not. And Democrats, 93%, are quick to believe there were secret documents. Just 7% of Democrats say they were not. So there's a big partisan divide there. These days, we're kind of used to big partisan divides.
And we looked at that divide with a factor of favorable or unfavorable views of Trump himself.
I wanted to see whether this difference in perception of documents being there or not, was that only a partisan divide, or did it have something to do with your feelings towards President Trump? And it turns out that it's really very much a function of your favorability to Trump or not, and much less actually a partisan issue. Of Republicans with a favorable view of Trump, an even bigger 75% deny that there were secret documents at Mar-a-Lago. And among independents with a favorable view of Trump, two-thirds, 67%, say there were no secret documents at Mar-a-Lago. So there were not enough Democrats who have a favorable view of Trump for us to break out their opinions. So just comparing Republicans and independents with favorable views of Trump. And what overall is 33% saying there are no documents there, in this case is over two-thirds or even three-quarters. Now, when we look at Republicans who have an unfavorable view of Trump, 85% of them say there were secret documents at Mar-a-Lago. 82% of independents say the same, And 94% of the Democrats with unfavorable views of Trump say that. So here you really do see that it's not party per se. It's the Republicans that are favorable towards Trump that are 3/4 saying there were no documents. But Republicans who are not favorable to Trump, 85% say there were such documents there. So I think the takeaway here is the big party differences that we saw at first largely evaporate when we realize that that is driven so much by this personal allegiance to Donald Trump or personal opposition to Donald Trump rather than partisanship per se. And while most Republicans are quite favorable to Trump, that minority of Republicans who are not favorable to Trump are in fact look an awful lot like independents who are not favorable to Trump.
So let's expand the focus a little bit to overall views of Trump.
He's been more unfavorable than favorable for a long time. In our polling, 34% of all adults in our sample have a favorable opinion of him, 64% unfavorable. And among Republicans, 75% are favorable, 23% are unfavorable. So there's a 3-to-1 split within the GOP between favorable to Trump and not favorable to him. But among independents, only 30% are favorable, 65% unfavorable to Trump. And looking to the broader future of American politics, those independents' views matter quite a bit. Democrats are just so united in opposition. Only 2% of Democrats were favorable towards Trump, 97% unfavorable. Again, that reflects both the party polarization and Democrats' views of Donald Trump. And that 2% favorable explains why I couldn't break out favorable Democrats a minute ago.
So what does that say about how Republicans particularly would feel about Mr. Trump running for another term?
Well, 66% of Republicans would like him to run again, 34% not. That hasn't changed very much since November of last year. I would point out that 77% of Republicans are favorable to Trump, but 66% would like him to run, and then 34% would not. So there is some slippage, not a lot, but 11-point difference between Republicans who like Trump versus Republicans who want him to run again. And so there is a little bit of slippage. Having said that, winning 66% in your party's primary would set you up for the nomination pretty solidly. I will say we have not asked a primary question posing Trump against other potential candidates. That seems a little premature, though we're not too premature, because remember the presidential primary process starts this coming January. In case you missed it on your calendar, let's just get that down there. Events will start to ramp up soon.
I don't want to think about it yet. But we did ask some trial head-to-head matches, President Biden against former President Trump.
Yep. And I guess having said that, we haven't asked a primary question, we are going to jump ahead to the general election. I want to put this in the context that we're not thinking that these trial heats today are indicative of where we would be 2 years from now. But what we are trying to follow is the structure of American public opinion towards alternative candidates as we go forward. And so it's in that sense that we ask these questions. That said, Biden gets 40% against Trump's 36%. But it is striking, and we're following it, 19% say they would prefer to support someone else. And so that's a fairly sizable percentage that would prefer new candidates to enter the race. Florida Governor DeSantis has been in the news a fair bit lately. I should say that the survey was completed before his flying people to Martha's Vineyard. So that event is not reflected in this polling. Biden, again, against DeSantis gets 40%, and DeSantis gets 35%, with 16% saying they'd like someone else, and also something in single digits say they wouldn't vote in these contests. I think the striking thing here is that the Biden versus Trump and the Biden versus DeSantis numbers are almost identical. In part, that reflects partisanship driving vote choices. And in part, it is an indicator that DeSantis is running as well against Biden as Trump is, or almost as well as Trump is, and that Biden has a small advantage over both of them at this point, but with a lot of people looking for an alternative.
There's not exactly a landslide of eagerness among Democrats for President Biden.
With Trump, it was 66% of Republicans that wanted him to run in 2024. With Democrats, it's only 52% that would like Biden to run. 48% of Democrats would like him not to run. And so this is an issue for Biden, an issue for the Democrats, and maybe an issue for other Democrats that might seek the presidency, is what happens to Biden's support within the party going forward.
And across the whole sample of the people we polled, also not exactly an avalanche for support for Biden to run again.
But no, for Biden or for Trump, really, this is the cleanest example of people ready to turn the page and move on. 28% of the whole sample would like Biden to run again, 72% not. And with Trump, it's 31% that would like him to run again, and 69% would not like him to run. So now, again, these are questions that make it easy to say, oh, I wish this person wouldn't run, because there's no clear alternative. There's not a, you want this person or that person. It's just, do you want Biden to run again? Do you want Trump to run again? But I think these numbers are pretty striking, that here you have two, dare I say, relatively elderly senior statespeople, senior president and former president. And there's a sense pretty clearly here that sizable majorities of the public would just as soon both of them move on in their lives.
Let's shift to broader questions of the landscape in American governance and politics. We ask about confidence in institutions. What did we find?
We asked several of these institutional questions. We want to track how people's feelings about each institution change over time. And so the numbers I'm going to give you are the percent that say they have a great deal or quite a lot of confidence in each of these institutions. Some of these institutions do kind of well with having some confidence in them, and then there's not much and no confidence at all, which I'm going to leave out. They're kind of mirror images except for that middle category, which I'll mention when it's relevant. You will be shocked to learn that the institution with the lowest level of confidence is the U.S. Congress. Congress always suffers on this measure in every survey I've ever seen. Partly it's the nature of Congress as a body that is complicated, shall we say. Your member of Congress almost always does better than the Congress. Anyway, 16% have a great deal or quite a lot of confidence in Congress. The Supreme Court is the next lowest at 30%, followed by the presidency at 33%. And this is the first time, as someone pointed out to me, this is the first time in our polling that the Supreme Court has ranked lower on confidence than the presidency. The presidency usually, if you're in that president's party, you have a lot of confidence in the presidency, even though we're trying to ask about the institution, and vice versa if it's not your party. But the Supreme Court has, in most of our surveys, shown substantially greater confidence, and that has really slipped this year. After the presidency, we got your state Supreme Court at 35%.
Which we're talking nationally, just to make clear. So this could be in all 50 states.
It's a national survey, but we ask, how about the Supreme Court or the highest court in your state? Some of them are not called Supreme Courts, which is very confusing. 35% have a lot of confidence in them. This is the case where a lot of people say some confidence in their state Supreme Court. I suspect that's because state Supreme Courts are not prominent in people's thinking most of the time. So the state Supreme Court has pretty low levels of low confidence, but a lot of people that sort of pick a middle category on this one. Then two institutions that have been in the news a bit lately, the FBI at 44% high confidence, and the police at 51%, the highest of the groups of the institutions we measured. So a little difference between the police and the FBI, but both of them end up at the top of this list of institutions that we covered.
There is a partisan aspect of this, though, and Trump and people who speak for him or admire him have suggested the FBI is part of this grand plan to attack him. So what do we find by party here?
Exactly. So first of all, the police are extremely high with Republicans. 73% of Republicans have a great deal or quite a lot of confidence in the police. That drops off to 45 with independents and 40 with Democrats. Here, I think the fact that independents and Democrats are pretty similar, but Republicans are quite high, is something to notice. This is part of recent campaign rhetoric of Republicans. But as Democrats were critics of the police in the wake of killings of black men, especially in 2020 and before, you might have thought independents and Democrats would separate a little bit more on this, but in fact, independents and Democrats are quite similar at 45 and 40% confidence in the police, but Republicans very high at 73. With the FBI, the situation is reversed. Republicans at just 30% confidence in the FBI, independents at 38, a little bit higher, but not enormously higher. And now it's Democrats that are quite high at 63. Not as high as Republicans were towards the police, but you can certainly see the distancing here. Now with the FBI, there's not simply the recent search at Mar-a-Lago and the controversies from the Trump complaints about that, but also the FBI has been involved in investigating Donald Trump for several years now, and Donald Trump has complained about the FBI, even replaced the director of the FBI at one point. And so I think the partisan angle on this is kind of expected, not remarkable. It's what you would expect. But it is on the side an interesting difference between two different law enforcement agencies and the way views of those law enforcement institutions have become partisan issues as well. There was a time when Democrats were quite suspicious of the FBI, for example, and Republicans were champions of it, but those times have passed for now.
I mean, the Democrats are 23 points above the difference between confidence in the police and confidence in the FBI also. So
that's right.
So
now, both sides have picked their institutions here, and you can argue that they've picked them for good reasons. Democrats skeptical of the police because of events that involve police killings of suspects, but Republicans because they believe that they have seen the FBI single out Donald Trump. we're not trying to settle the truth of these matters. What we're talking about is the public perceptions and how those have been influenced by partisanship and political rhetoric by political leaders. And I think it's kind of striking how these differences have now evolved with respect to the police and with respect to the FBI.
A prominent issue of late has been student loans and the impact they have on many people, and President Biden's plan to forgive up to $20,000 of student loan debt for many people. What's the overall sentiment on that?
Among all adults, 59% favor this reduction of loans, or forgiveness of loans. 40% are opposed. Want to ask me about the partisan split?
Nah, I don't care. No, okay. I bet there's a partisan split on this.
You know, you would be right on that question. 25% of Republicans favor, 75% opposed, with Democrats 89% favor, 10% opposed. But independents, 59 favor, 40 opposed, the same as the overall split.
The overall split.
And so on this issue, Republicans and Democrats are fully aligned, or nearly fully aligned, on the question. But there are independents leaning pretty strongly in favor of the loan forgiveness.
We also asked about, aside from partisanship, age and college graduation status. What did that show?
Here, I think we have an interesting finding, because a lot of the discussion of this focused on the difference between college graduates and non-college graduates as being an important difference in how people would react to this. What we actually find here in the national survey mirrors what we found in an earlier Wisconsin survey, and that is that age is by far the bigger influence on how you feel about this. And whether you went to college or not is a small additional influence. So among those in the 18 to 29 year age group who did not graduate from college, 82% support loan forgiveness. And among those who went to college, 77% support it. So actually slightly lower among the college graduates, though both are very high levels of support. When we go to the next age category, though, it drops into the 60s. Support is 69% with non-college folks in the 30 to 44 range, and it's 61% among college grads. When we go to those 45 to 59, support drops again. 56% among non-college, 60% among college grads. And finally, for those over 60, 41% support for non-college grads and 50% support among college grads. You can also see that the college grads were slightly less supportive in the less than 45 age groups and are a little bit more supportive in the older age groups. And again, we saw that in Wisconsin with the older people as well, that college graduation status mattered more among those over 60, who are hardly old by any stretch of the imagination. They're really quite young, as a matter of fact.
Totally agree.
So I think the upshot here is to rethink a little bit about how we thought folks would react to loan forgiveness. And there really is a very striking generational or age difference that we see, and only a little bit whether you went to college or not.
The focus on the abortion issue is shifting from the Supreme Court, which of course overturned the Roe versus Wade decision back in June, to nationwide action, legislatures and courts. What's the overall sentiment on abortion at this point?
Well, at the national level, 61% oppose the court's decision striking down Roe. 30% favor the decision, 10% say they don't have an opinion, don't know enough. In July, 57% were opposed and 31% in favor of striking it down, 12% without an opinion. So it's interesting that opposition to the court's decision has actually grown slightly over the last 2 months, and that the people with an opinion is just barely higher. We also saw that people were hearing a lot about the court's decision, and that actually ticked up slightly in September compared to in July, right after the ruling. So clearly a very visible decision, one that where the court ruled against the big majority or substantial majority of public opinion. And the issue has not gone away, oddly enough.
That's for sure. We did offer people some options on what do you favor in terms of broad outlines of abortion policy.
The question we've asked somewhat more than somewhat regularly, and other national pollsters use, is should abortion be legal in all cases, legal in most cases, illegal in most cases, or illegal in all cases? There's not been a lot of movement on this question. 31% say legal in all, 37% legal in most, 26% illegal in most, and 6% illegal in all. That roughly 60-something percent to 30-something percent is the balance we've seen for quite a while on these questions. So not a lot of movement on that question from before the court's decision to after. And as with the 61% that oppose the court's ruling, we see a little over 60% saying they think abortion should be all or mostly legal, and something in the mid-30s who say it should be always or mostly illegal.
There's been a lot of attention, speculation, on how big an issue abortion will be in the elections coming up on, I think I got the date right, November 8th. And how much priority are people attaching to it?
And here we really do see the boost that the abortion issue gives among Democrats who think it's very important to them. The question is, would you rate abortion as one of the most important issues, and important but not one of the most, and so on? Looking just at those who say it's one of their most important issues, 40% of Republicans and 42% of independents say that. But 61% of Democrats say it's one of the most important. And that's up from 48% of Democrats saying it was one of the most important back in May. And so I do think the argument that the abortion issue has uniquely energized Democrats has support here in terms of the change in rating it as one of the most important issues. That's up for Democrats. Didn't change very much for either Republicans or independents in the wake of the court's ruling.
So a hypothetical question we asked people, you've got a choice between a candidate who favors a strict limit on abortion and a candidate who you would label pro-abortion rights. How would you vote?
Here we did an experiment because I was curious. We had asked this question earlier about two unnamed candidates, describing them as supporting abortion rights or maintaining access to abortion versus strictly limiting. And we included a life of the mother exception in the description of the one of the candidates. But I was curious whether partisanship would override people's answers to that. And so this time we did an experiment, half of which just described a candidate who favors abortion rights or opposes. And in the other half of the sample, we asked a Democrat who favors abortion rights and a Republican who favors strict limits. And I was completely wrong. I thought we would see a difference between those two once you put the party queue, and there is just no difference at all. 55% favor the pro-abortion candidate, and 54% favor the pro-abortion Democrat, a 1-point difference. On the strict limit, 30% favor the strict limit candidate, And 29% favor the strict limit Republican. And the rest say abortion wouldn't matter to me, 15% about candidates, 17% about party candidates, party-affiliated candidates. In retrospect, I think this sort of demonstrates that people's understanding of where the parties align on abortion, Democrats in favor of preserving abortion rights, Republicans opposed or favoring strict limits on abortion. I think that this tells me, again, in hindsight, that those views really are baked in so much that we don't really need to provide the partisan cue for who the pro-abortion rights and who the pro-strict limits candidates are. The experiment made no difference whatsoever. But I think we now have empirical evidence that people already have their partisan sorting on the abortion issue. And this is as nice an example of an experiment that makes no difference as I'm aware of. So I'm proud of it that way.
Well, it does say something. It doesn't mean it didn't matter.
No, exactly. But
in general, sentiment whether abortion should be legal in cases involving rape or incest.
here we move the question to refer to specifically the laws in your state, where the Supreme Court's decision has now moved much of the abortion debate. 90% say abortion should be legal in cases of rape and incest. Just 10% say it should not be. That includes 81% of Republicans, 90% of independents, 97% of Democrats. And so this is an issue which is a live issue in a lot of states around the country, but one in which public opinion is as lopsided as any question I think we've ever asked. A question going forward is, does this level of public opinion influence the decisions of legislatures either in the short term or in the longer term? And I think that is an open question, and one that legislatures will find their way to deal with over the next months and years.
There has been advocacy among many abortion foes for making it illegal for a woman to travel to another state to get an abortion. What's the overall sentiment on that?
Here, 82% oppose a ban on a woman's travel out of state. That includes 74% of Republicans, 83% of independents, 86% of Democrats. So not as high as the rape and incest exception across those groups, but still 3 out of 4 say states should not try to impose those bans on travel out of state for the purposes of abortion.
A second aspect of that is whether it should be illegal for someone in a state where abortion is banned to order abortion pills, as they're often called, from out of state by mail.
And here too, there's lots of opposition to that. 76% overall oppose a ban on filling those prescriptions by mail from out of state. 60% of Republicans oppose that. That's a little less than we saw for the previous 2 questions, but still a solid majority. 79% of independents, 87% of Democrats oppose that. So here we have a set of 3 restrictions which have been debated and in some cases adopted by state legislatures where opinion, including among Republicans, is pretty clear. In earlier surveys, we looked at questions about at what stage of a pregnancy would you support a ban on abortion. We didn't re-ask those questions this time, so I'll refer people to the July survey for the results for that. But I think here you see on 3 very pertinent questions for state legislatures where the balance of opinion is.
President Biden's job approval. How's he doing?
Well, for the first time in a while, it's ticked up kind of notably. In July, 36% approved, 54% disapprove. This month, it's 45% approve, 55 disapprove. So, excuse me, the approval level popped up kind of noticeably. This is in line with national average of polls that have shown Biden moving from the average in the high 30s into the mid 40s. We're not far away from that average this time, and in showing that same movement. This is a period in which there were notable Democratic successes in legislation. Gas prices have fallen over the summer, and so I think it's not surprising that we're seeing a little bit of an uptick in Biden's numbers, though it comes after more than a year of falling approval levels until mid to late summer this year.
And again, to emphasize, this is nationally we're talking about, not in any specific state.
Right.
And the same with our next issue, which is enthusiasm. There was a gap between Democrats and Republicans. Republicans were more enthusiastic overall in a number of recent polls.
As recently as May, 55% of Republicans and just 42% of Democrats said they were very enthusiastic about voting this fall. But here in September, that's now 54% for Republicans, hardly changed, but up to 51% of Democrats. So still a slight gap there, but a major increase in enthusiasm for Democrats. Again, in part at least mirroring that change in views about abortion as being important to Democrats and abortion rising as an important issue for them. I think there are other things going on as well, like the legislative successes that we mentioned a minute ago. But it also goes with the notion that what was looking like a very strong midterm for Republicans with discouraged Democrats who were less interested, much of that advantage that Republicans had as of May is now dissipated.
And that also shows up on the question of what percentages say they are certain to vote in November.
Enthusiasm is one element of turnout, but when we ask people how certain they are to vote, those who say they're absolutely certain to vote actually do turn out at quite high levels. And when those who say they're very likely to vote but not absolutely certain, turnout drops off quite a bit there. So this is not a single infallible index, but it's certainly a useful one. Here, 73% of Republicans say they're absolutely certain to vote, compared to 75% of Democrats. I should say these are numbers for registered voters. So these are higher numbers than your overall turnout because these are only people who are already registered to vote.
And in a generic question of would you vote for a Democrat or a Republican, I believe it was for Congress.
For Congress, yes. Here, 47% say they'd vote for the Democrat, 41% say they'd vote for the Republican. We haven't asked this question earlier this year, so I can't tell you how that's trended. But this Democratic advantage is in line with the rising level of Democratic enthusiasm, commitment to vote, and so on. Having said that, I must say that this is a bigger Democratic margin than we're seeing in other national polls at this point. So put an asterisk next to it. If it turns out the Democrats win by 6, I'll claim credit for it. And otherwise, we're a little high on this question, should frankly say so.
And finally, favorable and unfavorables for a handful of national figures. My own observation would be is if you really want to be a beloved person, don't go into politics.
Well, that is so true these days, where I've called the electorate in Wisconsin grumpy, but I think that fits pretty well with the public when you look at right direction, wrong track, and we're very negative on that. But also when we look at favorabilities to various public figures. Part of this is the party polarization that we've gotten familiar with, in which the opposition party tends to rank politicians of the other party as very negative, not giving much benefit of the doubt. That pulls everybody down into more negative territory, but I want to stress that until through 2012, almost always both presidential candidates, including the loser, had net favorable opinions by election day. Every once in a while, you'd see one dip into negative territory for a while. But starting in 2016, both candidates were net negative, and we've seen that creep into state polling as well. So let's just go through these. I'm going to give you the net favorability numbers.
Meaning the positive views minus the negative views.
The percent positive minus the percent negative.
And if you're in negative territory, that's not so good.
Probably not where you'd ideally like to be. So in order of the people figures, some candidates, some office holders, some former office holders, some not even office holders. Donald Trump, minus 30. We mentioned that one earlier, actually. Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, minus 19. Mike Pence, former vice president, minus 17. Ron DeSantis, governor of Florida, minus 12. Joe Biden, president of the United States, minus 11. Pete Buttigieg, secretary of transportation, minus 6.
Minus 7.
7, minus 7, thank you. Liz Cheney, congresswoman, member of the January 6th committee, minus 6. And the one net positive that we found was Anthony Fauci at plus 2. And
even that's kind of 50-50.
Even that's pretty 50-50. Fauci has certainly been the target of criticism in some sectors. Given that criticism, I actually thought it was sort of interesting that he ends up being the only one of these figures that we asked about that manages to get into positive territory, even if only barely.
Thank you, Professor Franklin, for guiding us through these results. The full results, with a lot more details, and you can delve into them as to your heart's desire, are at law.marquette.edu/poll. And you can count on us to be back in about 2 months with more national poll results. And we'll also have upcoming Wisconsin poll results as we get closer to election days. So stay tuned for more on the Marquette Law School poll. Thank you for listening, and thank you for being engaged in these issues.